Let's break it down further with our legal panel. Trial attorney Mercedes Colwin joins us along with Misty Marris, another trial attorney and legal analyst. M&M here. We're always good to have both of you on with us to talk about this. It's, Rich was talking about it. I'll start with you, Misty, about the fact that the guy was alive when they got there. So that's, you can see it in the video. How does that work into things?
So that's really going to factor in what the defense is going to raise as causation. Was the chokehold itself actually the cause of Jordan Neely's death? And that's, the defense has already laid the foundation for that. We heard in some of the cross-examination today, defense questioning about the acts of the officers. Why wasn't there mouth-to-mouth resuscitation? What was the status at the time? And so they're going to try and undercut the case by saying there were other issues that resulted in Jordan Neely's death. It was not Daniel Penny's chokehold. If you cut off that causal element of the case in a manslaughter case, then that could lead to an acquittal, and that's the position the defense is taking.
What about intent when it comes to manslaughter, Mercedes here? 6-minute chokehold. What is the jury going to be instructed to look at?
Well, it's interesting because right from the get-go, even the prosecution said it's not that Daniel Penny intended to kill, obviously, what happened, the intended result. He did not have any intent to do any of this to cause the harm that led to Neely's death. So they're focusing on the intent from the very get-go on the prosecution side, because they understand that's going to be something that is going to be very focused by the defense. There is no intent to kill Jordan Neely. There was no intent. The only intent there was to protect himself and to protect the other strap hangers. So the intent is really out the window, especially when you talk about the elements of the crime. It's involuntary manslaughter, meaning that there was some level of negligence, gross negligence, that resulted in the death of Jordan Neely. So the fact that he didn't intend to result in his death and take actions that result in the death, that's really not the issue. The issue is going to be, was there sufficient self-defense? And exactly what Misty said, you remove the causation argument, that really will result in the acquittal. We'll see how effective the defense will be in that regard.
We will. I mean, it was interesting you talking about gross negligence, where they were talking about whether or not, Misty, he took the basic precautions, as it was worded. How's that defined? I mean, to go back to what I asked Mercedes about how the jury will be instructed, what are they going to say to the jury? What are basic precautions in a case like this?
Right, Connell, this is so critical because it's important to understand the legal standard. It's a reckless disregard for a known risk. That's what the prosecution has to prove. So in order to prove that, not only do they have to show that Daniel Penny acted unreasonably, because we know he's raising self-defense. So here's the elements. There has to be an imminent threat. He has to have acted reasonably under the circumstances and proportionately to the situation at hand, meaning proportionate force in response. So for the prosecution to be successful, not only do they have to show that he acted unreasonably, but he also acted with a reckless disregard to human life. In order to do so, we see where they're going. They're saying that because he had an expertise in martial arts, because he's a former Marine, he's uniquely positioned to understand the threat of a chokehold and that it could ultimately lead to death. So that's why we hear the prosecution focused on that factor. And also, Connell, this is what I thought was very interesting in the prosecution's opening. They're not talking about Penny initially restraining Neely. In fact, they said that could be justified. They're speaking specifically about the 5 minutes and 53-second chokehold where he remained in that chokehold for that period of time. So that's the critical period, and that's why we see that, because the standard is reckless disregard.
What about that, Mercedes? Nearly 6 minutes for a chokehold. Is that a proportional response in a situation like this?
Well, they're going to really focus, the prosecution is going to focus on the training that Daniel Penny received. And a lot of the training says when you put someone in a chokehold, it has to be for a very limited period of time, because there could be imminent death as a result of a chokehold. So the training is going to come into question. And frankly, 6 minutes does seem pretty extreme, except in the video, for the first time, we discovered that there was a pulse, that Jordan Neely was still breathing. And then the focus will be from the defense that it wasn't the chokehold that caused his death, but rather the drugs that was in his system, the K2. You're going to hear expert testimony about those drugs that were in Jordan Neely's body at the time. And certainly that could be something that will sever the causation argument.
So do you think then, Misty, if this guy wasn't a former Marine, if he didn't have any of that training that we've been speaking about, that he would be much less likely to face a conviction in a case like this? Or?
Connell, it would be a much more difficult case for prosecutors because they have to show that he was aware of a risk and he basically disregarded it.
Right.
And if you're just a layman and you don't really know what a chokehold is, you don't know if it's going to be effective or not be effective, then it would be difficult to prove that. Keep in mind, this is very distinct from cases against police officers who are trained with certain restrained techniques and what to use and when. This is an individual who is just a citizen who stepped in. So on that front, the prosecution is going to have to show that he, for some reason, had specialized knowledge that this could result in death. And just to piggyback on Mercedes' argument, the other issue here, not just causation, is whether or not it was reasonable to hold Neely in that chokehold for a longer period of time. Defense says he was still resisting, and Daniel Penny did not know whether or not he had a weapon. It's from his perception. So that's what the defense is going to focus on. Was it reasonable in that period of time that from the eyes of Daniel Penny?
Final point, Mercedes, do you have a sense from what we've talked about, what we've seen, which side has a stronger case here?
This city is so divided over this issue, Connell. I mean, there are people that are looking at this and say Daniel Penny's a hero, and there's a large group of people that's saying he's a murderer. So it really is going to be a toss-up. This is why this trial is going to be very long. It's 6 weeks. For a case like this, that's pretty long, but that's why all of that evidence is going to come in. The video is just the beginning. We'll see what witnesses are called, but it is such a divided issue. It really will be a toss-up.
Thank you both, Mercedes and Misty. Always great on the analysis of all of these cases coming up.